What I think they get wrong is when they go to create a show and they're thinking about results, they want to create a podcast so that a large number of people become aware of them for the first time. And creating a podcast to do that is very challenging. So a podcast for your company is better served as thinking about the ROI of it as being mid-funnel.
Hey, and welcome to Marketing with Empathy, the podcast for content marketers that want to connect with their audiences through brand storytelling and need help doing it better. Plus the recognition, growth, and personal happiness and satisfaction that comes from creating great work. My name is Sarah Panus, and I've spent the last 20 years leading successful brand storytelling strategies that are fueled by empathy and data, helping generate millions in revenue, growing team budgets from $0 to $10 million, growing teams from 1 to 9-person teams, removing silos for cross-functional sharing, and prioritizing storytelling initiatives within organizations. I always wished I had other people in the content marketing space I could riff with and learn from. So I created this podcast along with a free Marketing with Empathy Facebook community that you can join to connect you with others like yourself and give you a behind-the-scenes look at how other companies are doing it, giving you insights on actual strategies and tactics you can use to humanize your brand, connect with your audiences heart-to-heart and mind-to-mind, and improve brand storytelling results, all while growing and up-leveling your professional skills. In today's episode, we're going to clarify where in the marketing funnel your brand podcast drives the best results, and 3 tested and proven techniques to attract more people to your brand show. Podcasting guru and CEO Erik Jacobson has gone from 0 to 7 figures in revenue, helping more than 200 brands use podcast-to-podcast marketing techniques to build awareness, trust, generate leads, and drive revenue, including cold tweeting his way into projects with successful podcasters like Tim Ferriss. Erik's joining me today to share a really smart upper, mid, and low funnel tactical approach to podcasting that we've never quite talked about on this show before. And it might just be the ticket you need to plan for how your brand podcast best supports your content marketing funnel. Also, if you want extra coaching from me so I can personally help you level up your brand storytelling skills at the end of the episode, stick around. I'll let you know how to do that. But for now, let's just get a quick word in from today's sponsors and then hop right into the show.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more to reach the professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Plus, with 1 billion members on LinkedIn, that means you'll have access to 130 million decision makers and 10 million C-level executives. That's a lot of millions of the right people. Get started today and see how you can reach the right buyers with LinkedIn's enhanced targeting tools. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
Erik, you've helped more than 200 brands share their stories through the power of podcasting. What success are you seeing podcasts generate for brands right now?
This is something that is sometimes hard for companies when they're first thinking about podcasting to understand what the value is, what the ROI is, because it's not as clear as some other channels that they maybe have been doing for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Based on having worked in podcasting and helping companies do this, is that the brands that are going to win in the future are those where customers can name people who work there. And podcasting, I believe it's one of the best. And the reason for that is when it comes to results, it helps with creating demand and capturing it. So, creating demand is powering your ability to help educate your ideal market or your ideal buyers that your solution exists for a problem that they maybe are already aware of or they're not aware of. And so you're actually creating demand. Capturing demand is getting in front of people who are already looking for a solution to the problem you helped solve. And podcasting can help with both of those. And so, like, the way that content is consumed now is changing a lot. And so that means PR is changing and it's moving from legacy media, where these media conglomerates were controlling the content mostly because they had the distribution, to now it's more like individual creators and brands creating content. And that is actually where people are consuming it, is from the individual creators and from the individual brands. So the two ways you can do this is you can start your own show for your company, or you can go on a podcast tour. We've helped many companies do both, and there's pros and cons to both. But again, from your question with the results perspective, there's really three ways that this helps from a top of funnel, a mid funnel, and a bottom of funnel perspective. Podcast tour essentially helps with your top of funnel and bottom of funnel. So top of funnel being attention and awareness, like getting people to know that you exist. Bottom of funnel is content that helps you actually conversion content. So basically content that helps you close a sale. And then creating your own show is predominantly a mid-funnel activity, which is essentially long-form content to help people build trust and a relationship with you over a long period of time. And then it also does help with bottom of funnel as well. And so most people, what I think they get wrong is when they go to create a show and they're thinking about results, they want to create a podcast so that a large number of people become aware of them for the first time. And creating a podcast to do that is very challenging. Even when you already have an audience that's built on other channels, getting someone to opt into a 30 to 60 minute long interview and do that on a consistent basis and build a habit around it is very challenging. So if you're creating a show with the end ROI or result being like you want tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people to become subscribers and listen to that show on an ongoing basis, and then find out about your company for the first time because the show is what brought them to it, it's not impossible, but it's a challenge. So a podcast for your company is better served as thinking about the ROI of it as being mid funnel. So it's actually a home base for people who become aware of you on other channels to then send them to your podcast. A newsletter is another example of, mid funnel, like long form content or virtual events and things like that.
Yeah.
So basically you want a place where maybe they become aware of you on social media, but then to get to know you better and to be able to tell your story in a better way and build a deeper relationship that has trust built into it, that is a good home base for where to send people to, is through your podcast. So that would be what I would think about a little bit, as in terms of the ROI on creating your own show. A podcast tour is very, very, very effective for building your top of funnel awareness. You're going on shows that already have an audience built. So you're not creating one from scratch. So if you're looking to become known to a lot of people in your market fairly quickly and be seen as a market leader in terms of perception, going on a podcast tour, i.e., getting interviewed on many shows in your category, as many as possible, is one of the best ways to do that. You're not building a long-term home base for them to continue coming back to like you would with your own show. And that's why these strategies play hand in hand very nicely.
In my work with corporations, podcasting metrics are so different than other digital marketing like paid ads and metrics that you get. One, because I think the podcast measurement space is kind of still a little new. Like it's not as advanced as some other channels where you can get into all the nitty gritty as well and of knowing exactly who your audience is and those details. But I think that companies that are used to, seeing 1 million views on a video or, 300,000 engagements on a post or in social or things like that, like large corporations, when they get into the podcasting space, it can feel like, and I've heard, well, is it really worth all the effort? We're not going to get as much. And my counter has always been in the discussion is always, well, it's quality over quantity, really, I think, in the podcasting space, because there is no other medium where people tune in to listen for as long as they do to a podcast. Like you said, 30 to 60 minutes. And it is such an incredible opportunity to show your thought leadership, to talk about the topics, your storytelling pillars that matter to your brand, and to showcase the people at the brand, to create that human connection with your audience. If a company was starting out, with a podcast, approximately, what kind of growth they should expect to see within the first year or two, just as like a baseline to level set people?
A lot of it depends on what you're starting from, because when you launch the show, you'll be able to promote it to your current audience
Yep.
and prior customers and things like that. And different companies are starting from different places with that. But what I would say is a podcast that you create for your company that is listened to by as few as 500 people on a weekly basis who are the right people, or 1,000 people or 2,000 people. So fairly small numbers in comparison to what many people think of as like a large audience,
Yeah.
especially on social, can fundamentally change your business. Like, 500 people compared to 10,000 Instagram followers, like how is that comparable?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of advantages. The average podcast across all of Apple and all categories, so not just business related shows, but or shows for businesses, is listened to by around 175 people per episode. So that is it gets 175 downloads roughly on average across all podcasts. So once you start getting to 1,000 listeners, 5,000 listeners, 10,000 listeners, you're in the top 90th, 95th, 98th percentile, at that point in terms of like listenership and audience of podcasts. So it is very challenging, again, to build that audience, but it's very, very worthwhile for what you can do with the content and how it can help all aspects of your company. Your podcast can be ROI positive from episode 1 in terms of what you do with the content, how you repurpose it, and how you use the show on offense, rather than like creating a show, hoping people listen to it, and then hoping good things happen as a result. You can be really strategic with it.
You just mentioned a small audience even can fundamentally change your business. Do you have an example you can share of how?
I'll just use our show that we created for our company, Lemonpie. It's called Brands That Podcast. And it was never listened to by more than 200 people on a per episode basis. But that show by itself helped power 7 figures in pipeline and
Amazing.
and directly. And it's because we created a show very intentionally with specific goals tied to what stage of the funnel we wanted to help. So again, we didn't want the show to create all these new people who become aware of us through the show. What we wanted to do is create a show that helped us be seen as experts in our space, such that people who already became aware of us from another channel that is more effective for getting attention, we use the podcast as a tool for them to want to work with us more than anybody else they could have chosen. And then also building relationships and also repurposing the content to then power our content across all of our social channels. And so all those things together basically made it such that the podcast was the central pillar piece of content that then powered everything else we were doing. And that by itself was enough to have huge returns for us.
Oh, I love that. That's such a smart strategy. And I've never heard anyone articulate it in the mid funnel piece of it. Usually it's always discussed about like upper funnel and bringing them in. And then you work them down the funnel to convert through like a product or service or something that your company offers. So super smart. So you mentioned podcast tours. My question first then is, how do you think through the strategy of if a podcast tour is right for you?
In an ideal world, you would start the podcast tour slightly after you have already created your own show and you've launched it. And it doesn't mean you should only do a podcast tour if you've already created a show. But the reason for that is that one of the best ways to grow a podcast, which, I mentioned earlier is tough to do, is podcast to podcast marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few variations of things you can do within that, but one of them is be a guest on other similar shows in your space. And then when you're a guest on that show, mention that you also have a show in that category or covering those topics or things like that. And converting a listener of one similar show over to your show is way easier than converting someone from a Facebook ad to your podcast. But if you're unsure about this channel as a whole, I would actually recommend starting with a podcast tour. See if you can get interviewed on 10 different podcasts just to see if you enjoy it, have time for it, can devote, the time, energy, resources needed to do it successfully before you go and create your own show, because creating one is far more difficult than being a guest on one.
Got it. And you mentioned your podcast, Brands That Podcast. I know as we're recording this, you guys had just recently wrapped up season 2. So will there be a season 3 of your podcast?
Yeah, so we decided to do a seasonal approach to it. And yes, there'll probably be a season 3, although we are thinking about possibly changing up and creating a different show that serves a different purpose. Because again, you can be really, really specific about goals that a podcast does for you. And maybe once you've reached the conclusion of one show, it doesn't mean you have to be done with podcasting altogether. It can just mean it's maybe time to focus on a different show for a different persona, maybe that you want to get in front of or be seen as experts with or build relationships with.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're kind of debating that right now, in terms of like, will we do a season 3 of Brands That Podcast, or will we actually create a different show?
Cool.
And if we do create a different show, it actually probably will be more focused on PR and modern PR than podcasting. But yeah, we'll see.
Neat. Well, it's a great example. I'm glad you said that because it's a good reminder that you're not stuck in one path. I mean, sometimes I think
Exactly.
people think they have to just keep trugging along, but if it's run its course and it's met your end goals, then fine. Or if you want to switch topics like you're talking about, you can, and that's okay. Okay, so then
Yes.
podcast tours. Let's go back to that then. So we got the strategy behind why. I mean, that podcast to podcast marketing is the way to really help grow your show. You're tapping into an existing audience, an audience that already listens to podcasts. There's a lower hurdle. They're already listening, so more likely that they would want to listen to another show like yours. What should brands know then to do podcast tours successfully?
So there's obviously, kind of a lot that goes into a successful podcast tour. But I guess fundamentally, what I would say is what's amazing here is you don't have to be famous already to be able to be a guest on really great podcasts, as long as you have something valuable to teach. And that's the cool thing about this medium is like the whole reason most shows are created is to help listeners do something better, get better, learn something new, have fun, feel like they're part of a community. If you have some expertise and some value you can share, you can be a great guest for a lot of podcasts. It's really important that you think about this not as an opportunity to pitch whatever it is you do or whatever it is you sell, but to literally try and give as much as possible to each interview you do and to each show you are a guest on and to the listeners of those shows, because it's going to come across in your outreach and it's going to come across in your interview if like your goal and intent is to sell. Your goal should be like the amount of value you're giving is so high that they have to stop whatever they're doing, which usually people are like doing, they're busy. They're actually preoccupied when they're listening to podcasts, like their hands are tied up. Maybe they're driving, they're walking the dog, they're doing dishes, whatever. You want them to have to stop what they're doing and take notes because what you're saying is so valuable.
Perfect. And in terms of like who from the company should be the voice, like what criteria should companies think about when they're selecting which employee spokespeople are part of the tour and who's out there talking?
Totally. So usually this is going to be best served by the folks who are most like the people you want to get in front of. So what I mean by that is if you're selling to marketers, you absolutely could have the founder of the company be a guest on marketing related podcasts. But actually, the highest amount of credibility that will come from marketers is if they are listening to another fellow marketer. So in an ideal world, you would have, your CMO or your VP of marketing being a guest on those topical shows related to marketing.
Does it matter if they are the host or not the host of the show if the brand has a show?
Again, that is also ideal, where if you are promoting your show through this, you will get the best results if the person promoting it is also the host, but you will still get great results of, let's say, like someone on the marketing team is hosting it, but the CEO is the one giving an interview. If the CEO promotes the podcast, that will still be incredibly effective, but it will be slightly less effective than if the host were the one that they just listened to for 60 minutes and then also promoted the podcast. Because shows are not just about education or entertainment, they're also about like friendship. A lot of people listen to podcasts because they feel like they're friends with the host. So if the host is the person that they just listened to for 60 minutes and they like their personality, that is going to lend itself very well to conversion from folks to come over and check out that podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because it's a good distinction, folks. If you have a brand podcast or you're thinking about creating one, think about making sure that you bake that into your host's contract or, their roles and responsibilities is X number of interviews on other podcasts. And then also to your point, Eric, then what are like complementary, like other folks who are great communicators who could be out there like to like type topics. And then as part of their discussion, they can mention your new podcast as well. I think that's really important because I think sometimes what I've seen is big brand will hire like a bigger name to be like the host of this podcast. It's not necessarily hosted by someone in-house, or maybe it's in tandem with someone in-house, but the big name is just doing the show and they don't really do a lot outside of that. And so that's a huge miss, obviously, based on what you're sharing,
Totally.
because you want that podcast to podcast. And I love the idea of thinking of it as a friendship because you're right. It's very intimate because you're hearing our voices right now in your ears for a very long period of time. And if you like it, you keep listening and it's true. I'm thinking of some of my favorite podcasts and I feel like I really know the people, even though I don't. And I know that there's been some of them where I've been on their shows or I've met them like online on a Zoom call and I'm like, hey, I feel like I've known you forever because I've listened to you in my ear for, for the
Exactly.
last year kind of a thing. So that's
Exactly.
funny. I'm like, they don't know me, but I really feel like I know them very, very well.
Hey, nice to meet you. I know everything about you.
Everything about you. I know brand content teams are always stretched pretty thin in terms of they always wish they had more people and more time. So, Eric, like what tips do you have like how to operationalize the outreach to all of these podcasts? And like who usually coordinates the outreach for these podcast interviews?
Yeah, totally. So in an ideal world, you would have some speakers, either one or multiple from the company, and then you would have somebody helping them setting up these interviews, whether that be outreach, like that first point of outreach, or maybe the speakers themselves, like the folks that will be doing the interviews, actually have connections to some shows. And so they set them up, but the person sort of helps facilitate and schedule them and prep and like things like that. But what I would say is I can actually recommend like a very practical tool here and one that was not available until, maybe a year or two ago. And it's really powerful. I'm not affiliated with them at all. It's just a great tool that was created by a solo developer. And it's called Rephonic, Rephonic. It's a database of podcasts. And so you can search, you can put in keywords. Maybe let's say you're targeting marketers. You would just type in marketing and it will give you a list of all of the podcasts that have marketing in the title or marketing found somewhere else, maybe in the description or episode titles or episode descriptions. And it will give you the email addresses as well. I cannot tell you how much time this saves. And then from there, think about it from quality as opposed to quantity of outreach. So this is one mistake that some folks make where they'll get the list, maybe it's 50, 100, 200 shows. And to save time, they basically send a very generic sort of cold templated outreach to all of them at once or in quick succession. And they get some yeses, but way less than what they could get if they actually took their time. So what I would recommend is instead of trying to send, 50 pitches over the course of, a few days or 1 week, take a month to do 50 pitches, but personalize them and do something unique in them to make it clear that you know about the show, like we call it like a 5-minute favor, where you take 5 minutes and you do something nice for the host and include it in your pitch. Whether that's like if they have a book, buy their book, leave a review for them on Apple and Spotify, promote them on social media. Nobody is doing these things, and it will help you stand out, but it takes time. But why this is important is because you have a finite number of great shows in your category. There will likely be a lot, but there's not going to be 10,000. There's going to be, maybe a couple hundred at most. And so instead of getting 5 to 10 of those to say yes just on a numbers game, you could actually get, 30 to 50% of them to say yes if you just were willing to take a little bit longer. And ultimately, that's going to give far superior results over the long term. It is so much better to get yeses from the right shows slightly slower than it is to get yeses from the wrong shows and then run out of all the other options you have for podcasts.
Definitely. And is that what your team does then at Lemonpie? Because I know it's a podcast PR agency. Are you working with clients and pitching out and getting them, doing all this outreach and organizing it for them?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, this is what we do at Lemon Pie. And what we say is like, if you were to do this the correct way with like a really great approach, it is always best for you to do it yourself rather than hire somebody else to do it. The reason for that is it comes across as more genuine and more personal, but it is highly time intensive to do it correctly. And that's where like hiring somebody else, if you wanted to do this strategy to do it for you, and do it consistently on offense, like that's where it's a really great approach at that point. But you will get slightly better results. Let's say if it was us doing it or you doing it and we both did it the same way, you would get actually slightly better results doing it yourself.
That definitely, I think, paints a very clear picture on what podcast tours are, why you'd want to do them, how you can execute them, the who, and doing it well, and focusing on the quality of the pitches over just volume of content. Are there any other like marketing tactics or best of type tips you have that people should know about to grow their podcast before we wrap up today?
Yeah, so this one's cool, and this is again what we see as the most effective option for growing a podcast is podcast to podcast marketing. So, like we mentioned, doing a podcast tour is one of those options. The other two options are podcast advertising. So, paying to have a 30 to 60-second ad read that is promoting your show on other similar shows. And then the third option is an episode drop. And this is what some of the biggest podcast networks in the world do, where they take an entire episode of their show and they put it inside the feed of all the other shows that they have in their network when they launch the new show. And so this is how they get awareness for the new show, but not at a surface level. They actually get people to consume an entire episode as long as they're like, willing to hit play and like check it out rather than a pitch to go listen to it. And so we don't see a lot of companies doing this, but I actually find this to be the most effective plus scalable way to grow a podcast, whether you do a collaboration with another similar show and you put an entire episode of theirs inside your feed or vice versa, or you pay to do it. So instead of paying for a 30-second ad read, you pay to have your entire 30-minute episode with their host doing a intro for it that is then put inside of that feed. And that will be slightly less effective than you doing an actual interview on that show. But the benefit is it doesn't require your time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's slightly more scalable. And there's no like marketplace for this. There's really like, you kind of have to DIY this approach, but I definitely see this as one way that the biggest networks in the world are growing their shows and one that, you could use too.
Yeah. I love this. It's definitely, I'm seeing it grow more. I know this podcast is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. And so we're with a ton of other marketers podcasts. And so we've started doing that with each other where we're doing episode drops on each other's shows. And as a podcaster myself, it's useful amongst podcasters because it takes a lot of work to produce a podcast and every episode takes a lot of time. And every once in a while, maybe you'll have a guest back out or you won't be as far ahead in your schedule as you wanted to be, or, things happen, or maybe you're going to go on vacation or have a baby or things like that. And you need some
Yep.
filler content. I think podcast drops, like you just explained, are great for that. And it's a win-win, like together. And I've also found it too, where if you pitch yourself, like on this podcast tour, if you pitch yourself and they don't have availability to have you on as a guest, you could always follow up and ask if you'd be willing to do a swap.
Exactly. And it's not a sleazy tactic. Like
No, yeah.
if you were to, if you have a show and you put someone else's episode in your feed, as long as you actually like vet the show and vet the host and vet the episode, you're providing valuable content that your audience would enjoy. So that's actually more valuable than an ad read.
I feel like I could talk to you forever because you're super knowledgeable in this space. And I'm coming up on 2-year here anniversary of Marketing with Empathy. So I still feel like I'm a newbie, right?
No,
I know I'm not like
that's
new,
amazing.
but like in my head, I still feel like I'm a newbie. So I'm always like,
Huge
tell me more.
Huge props. 2 years is no small feat. Very few make it that far.
Thank you.
Pod fade is a real thing and it is not easy keeping a show going. So props to you on that.
Thank you. I love it. I love this space. I love the potential it has for brands. And so thank you for coming on to share. How else can people find you online?
We've got a company called Lemonpie. It's lemonpie.fm. We help primarily tech companies, but we can help a lot of B2B companies set up their own podcast stores like we just talked about. And we've got another company called Hatch, which is hatch.fm. And this is where we help companies create, produce, and edit and run their own podcast as well. So kind of covering, we just love podcasting, as you probably can tell at this point. So, so we're all in on it. But yeah, happy to chat with anybody.
There you go. Erik Jacobson, CEO of both Lemonpie and Hatch podcast companies, taught us why podcast-to-podcast marketing is where it's at when you're looking to attract an audience and grow your brand podcast listenership, and how to think about your podcast in the upper, mid, and lower funnel, along with 3 tested and proven techniques to attract more people to your show and help you better plan how your podcast supports your overall content marketing funnel. Erik recommends 3 tactics. So let's just recap quick. We got podcast tours, being on other people's podcast advertising that you would buy, and podcast drops, where a full episode of your podcast plays on someone else's podcast show to introduce it to their listeners. So when looking at the marketing funnel, podcast tours help drive top of funnel engagements to create attention and awareness. Erik shared why to do them, when to do them, how to do them well, and that personalized outreach to a smaller list of podcasts is key. Mid-funnel is where creating your own branded podcast show is predominantly going to drive the most ROI for your company because it's long-form content that helps your audience trust you and build a more humanized relationship with your brand over a long period of time. I think Erik's take on this is really smart and hopefully sparked some aha thoughts for you around how you think about your branded podcast goals. And low funnel conversions come from promoting your services to a quality audience of your highly engaged podcast listeners. The average podcast gets 175 downloads, so set realistic goals, people. Don't focus on huge download numbers. Focus instead on attracting quality listeners because, as Erik shared, his company's own podcast had no more than 200 listeners per episode, yet those listeners helped generate 7 figures in his business. The link to Erik Jacobson's Lemonpie and Hatch websites is in the show notes. And before we finish today's episode, I have a special bonus to share with you. How would you like to learn 3 ways to improve your overall content strategy this year? It'll help you build stronger brand storytelling plans that connect with your audience and give you the recognition, growth, and personal happiness that comes from creating great work. I've recorded 3 quick videos walking you through 3 ways to improve your content strategy this year that I want to share with you. Just head over to kinderspeak.com/favorites, and I'll send you the 3 short videos unpacking things I've learned the last 20 years around how to humanize your brand, repurpose content, and create a group of allies to help grow and align brand storytelling inside your company. Get this 3 ways to improve content strategy freebie by heading over to kinderspeak.com/favorites with an S. That's kinderspeak.com/favorites. And if you want even more hands-on brand storytelling coaching from me, stick around to see if my 3-month Brand Storytelling Academy program is the professional development support you've been looking for. If you're hearing my voice right now, you're likely a brand content marketer and communications professional who wants to connect with their audience through storytelling and is looking for help to do it better, along with the recognition, growth, and personal happiness perks that come from creating great work. What would it feel like to have the skills, confidence, and know-how to advance your brand storytelling results and love the work you're doing? That's why I created the Brand Storytelling Academy, a hands-on 3-month group training program designed to help brand content marketers like you attract top funnel leads that drive bottom funnel results through editorial storytelling. For 1/6 of the cost to hire a person on your team or onboard a high-level brand storytelling strategist, you or up to 5 people on your team can be developing and accelerating your brand storytelling skills this year. Think of it like a college certification program for you and your team, but you get the knowledge a lot quicker, and your professor, me, has 20 years of hands-on experience guiding you along the way. Curious? I'd love to hear from you. Fill out the application at kindredspeak.com/apply to learn more, and I'll be in touch to answer all your questions and discuss if it's a good fit. That's kindredspeak.com/apply.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Robbie Samuels hosts the On the Schmooze podcast. Robbie, tell listeners what to expect from the show.
Since 2015, I've interviewed entrepreneurs who overcame challenges to achieve success in their field or industry. Tune in to On the Schmooze to listen as I ask deep questions to elicit untold stories about leadership and networking.
And where can people subscribe?
Find the show at ontheschmooze.com or on marketingpodcast.net, or just search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard them. Go subscribe.